Okay,
let's move to the introduction of the panel that was recorded, pre-recorded, under the wise management of Nevenka Bogataj, who covers sustainability at our institute with three policy makers, Dr. Janez Berdavs from the Ministry of Environment and Spatial Planning, Mrs. Nataša Bucik from the Ministry of Culture. Don't be surprised that we've included culture, and Aleš Ojsteršek from the Ministry of Education, Science and Sport. And I hope and believe we also have Tadeja Kvasmajer from the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Food. Yes, I can see you. That was invited slightly late, but she kindly responded and will comment the video. And it will be intertwined with examples from the practice as announced before. And thank you to the colleagues from the People's University of Postojna, Ajdovščina and Developmental Center of Postojna. 50 minutes of the program is ready, recorded, and we are talking to you in multi-sensory way. You could not hear us, but you could read our materials earlier, so you've seen the videos with sound as well. All the materials will be available on our webpage. So we also added Lara Kastelic. She will draw all our discussions and forums in her own way. You can watch her drawings. So let's move on. Guys, let's move and play this panel. And I believe everything runs smoothly. For our local community, as a People's University, we are recognized as the institution promoting sustainable development, which we prove with successful projects. I believe that if we wish to encourage sustainable development, it is truly important to include all groups of people, all knowledge that we have, and set interdisciplinary projects. In modern, global, multicultural and aging society, the role of education is important to raise the awareness, to encourage us to use the resources to develop our production in the ways that respond to restrictions of the environment. And we have to emphasize goals, contents and ways of learning that support all three components of sustainable development: ecology, economy, and culture and society. We truly believe into the power of cooperation and connection, and planning, realization and management of educational programs should be connected in comprehensive system of innovative cores. And we have to connect them. We have to bring knowledge into new models. It is important to have systematic monitoring and research of good practices, new models looking for social innovation, meaning education with society and for society. Education for sustainable development exceeds studying specific problems. The most important problem is development of identity, critical thinking about values, systems, quality of life, ethical and aesthetic relationship with environment.
Welcome all online participants and of course dear guests at the Slovenian Institute for Adult Education to talk about the green transformation of society. There are representatives of three ministries with us, namely the Ministry of Education, Mr. Aleš Ojsteršek, Director of Educational Development Unit, Ms. Nataša Bucik from the Ministry of Culture, Coordinator of Cultural and Artistic Programs, and Dr. Janez Berdavs, expert and Under Secretary at the Ministry of the Environment and Spatial Planning. Yes, we are going to talk about time, about duration, speed and pace of adjustment to changes in the environment, including climate change. And therefore, let's start immediately with a question. How long have you been confronted at your ministries with education in its role of adjustment, responding to the environment, and what would you suggest in order to accelerate the response to the changes in the environment through education, of course? If we start at the Ministry of Education, the concept of dealing with the environmental issues was formally adopted in the previous decade, so that this aspect was then created perhaps more evidently and with the aim of true acceleration or a conceptual integration through the adoption of the guidelines for education and training for sustainable development. But otherwise, the environment has all the time been part of the education policy and of the system as such. But when you ask about a faster response, what you probably have in mind is the integration of educational policies and environmental change trends. The Ministry of the Environment and Spatial Planning will focus more on that. So the climate agreement commitments and everything else related to that. So after 2015-2016, when the Paris Agreement came, the Ministry of Education has had close contacts with the Ministry of the Environment. The relevant experts prepared the first measures for the analysis of policies, and since then we have felt this closeness. What I can also stress in this first part relating to this topic is that as a faster response, I can say that we make sure that the policies are put in place, that we cooperate with other ministries, that we monitor what is going on at the multilateral level in this area, meaning that we have been present all the time at the broadest level in the space and documents of the UN, UNESCO, followed by the European space, where recently the European Commission has announced the first programming document on this topic by the end of this year, and you, the professionals, are the co-creators of that. And then at the national level, which will probably be the topic of the discussion today a bit later, the ministry's role is connecting the key institutes as regards the action plans on environmental topics, addressing education and lifelong learning in particular, and perhaps we will deal with that in more detail later today. And of course, as part of the responsibilities of the ministry, when we talk about the national reform plan, where within the recovery and resilience plan, the education is specifically addressed under the sustainability chapter. It seems to me, therefore, that at the ministry we have focused on this topic sufficiently within our powers, and we also plan to support the actions taken by our agents, institutions, schools, professionals, and adult education centers. Maybe so much from me at this stage. Thank you very much. What about you at the Ministry of Culture? Perhaps the colleagues should be given the floor first. Maybe we'll give the floor to the Ministry of the Environment as the last in this round. So, please, the floor is yours. The Ministry of Culture, together with cultural institutions that it finances, has responded, of course, throughout that period to current social change and also to sustainable development. Cultural institutions from all areas prepare various cultural programs relating to diverse topics connected with sustainable development, including climate change, currently being more in our focus. As regards sustainable development, we cover the broadest spectrum, from equal opportunities to migration crisis and the like. On the one hand, the Ministry finances or co-finances the development of such cultural programs, while at the same time, in cooperation with the Ministry of Education and the National Education Institute, we have taken care a number of years of professional training of staff in the area of culture as well as education and training, so that they bring these programs closer to children. Our idea is that when you bring closer to a child or an adult a specific topic through some cultural content, which, for example, can be a book, a fiction, a show, you address them differently than if you introduce to them a theoretical material. These approaches have proven to be more efficient on the basis of specific cultural contents. Young people think more critically about such topics. Since 2006, we've cooperated very intensely with the Ministry of Education in this respect, not only as regards the programs, but also the activities to improve even more the understanding and acceptance of such cultural content. We put a specifically high emphasis on professional training and at the same time also on co-financing the projects to bring them directly to the users. As regards professional training, our largest project here is Cultural Bazaar, where every year we prepare the topics to connect different ministries. And when Aleš mentioned when it all started, we opened up the sustainable development topic as early as 2012. Later, we also dealt with other topics related to individual aspects of sustainable development. 2 years ago, for example, equal opportunities, then water was discussed as a topic. In addition to that, we also support the professionals in education through different materials that we produce. As regards sustainable development, last year, a selection of theater performances was made, for example, concerning the sustainable development challenges. Let me mention that on the 12th of October there will be the first night performance at the Mladinsko Theatre of the show titled Heat, touching upon the climate crisis. A performance that will most certainly deal with such issues. In the same way, selections of high-quality literature are made, both fiction and handbooks and literature for various target groups, that is from preschool children to adults. Let me mention as an example the books written by Nevenka Bogataj that are certainly important also for the education process. Then, in the field of movies, the selection always includes high-quality films, theater performances, also exhibitions, since we also collect such information. Let me mention in this respect films by Matej Franič, Birds of the Lakes and Wild Slovenia, two films as examples of encouraging young and adults to think about the environment in which we live. Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to the representative of the Ministry of the Environment. Hello, I would like to say first of all that my historical memory at the Ministry of the Environment is much too short to know when the ministry started dealing with education and training in this respect. Many people have worked here, and I continue the work of my predecessors. And the main challenge is to really to reach the objective set, and if we manage to do that, I'm sure we will make a significant progress in this field. The plans are ambitious, and currently we are in the phase of their implementation. Obviously, the emphasis in our work is on climate change, both mitigation and adjustment to climate change. And we have two main programs or projects here. The first project is Life Care for Climate. At our ministry, we also try to combine to the maximum possible extent different financing sources, and we are partly funded from the EU funds, the LIFE program, partly also from the Climate Fund. Two main tasks of this project, Care for Climate, are, on the one hand, to raise environmental and climate awareness among the general public. We are not working only in the field of education, but also in awareness raising. We carry out awareness raising campaigns also in the media. The second main objective, even more relevant for this discussion, is identification of skill gaps. Here, we have primarily in mind people in the world of work, in the broader sense, both in private and public sectors, also in agriculture, in entrepreneurship. So this project contains a program comprising a set of trainings, mostly dedicated to employees or self-employed, also to managers. The fact is that the transition to a low-carbon society will bring about new technologies, new materials, new organizational models. Or, to put it simply, this will be a considerable social change and will impact both our day-to-day and professional lives. The training has been designed in energy efficiency, renewables, green technologies. They are addressed to municipalities, municipal officials, then in transport, local energy concepts. We also train public officials in green public procurement. The transition to a low-carbon society will also result in a change in a lot of legislation, regulations, and here as well, the staff should be appropriately trained. Then training in waste, food, etc., in the field of agriculture as well. So we try to fill the gaps identified already in the operational program on reduction of greenhouse gas emissions years ago, and now in the new National Energy and Climate Plan. The second major program, currently in the phase of development, in cooperation with the Ministry of Education and public institutions from the field of education, is the measure relating to climate content in education and training, financed from the Climate Fund. we would actually finance the work of public institutes, including the host, the Slovenian Adult Education Center, as well as the National Education Institute, the Institute for Vocational Education and Training, and a Center for Curricular and Extracurricular Activities. Our intention is to really strengthen climate and similar content in the entire field of education and training for sustainable development, along the entire vertical, from kindergartens to high education institutions. Higher education, however, is covered by the Care for Climate project, so that these two programs complement each other, and we practically cover both formal and informal education by these two programs. Thank you very much to all three of you. As a matter of fact, all of you highlighted the management role, which in 2018 in an OECD study was also specifically mentioned. The pace of environmental change is growing, and probably it is difficult to adjust the management of large systems such as ministries, along with all institutions or institutes, to such an accelerated pace of change. Given the Global Agenda 2030 with these 17 objectives, we can be quite happy with what has been achieved. But as you mentioned, Mr. Berdavs, strengthen specific content and seek synergies between these objectives is probably the challenge we are all facing, both you as well as institutes, people on the ground, we all in Slovenia. We are happy to see that you are satisfied with what you've done. Mr. Ojsteršek, you highlighted the integrity of the systemic response. The guidelines were adopted in 2007. We are now in 2021. And our question is how to accelerate this response, how to achieve synergies in a large system, and to stress new needs, contents. Some days ago, Ljubljana was flooded, and there were large wildfires in Greece. We are not used to such extreme phenomena at our doorstep. How can a large system really respond through education and training? Thank you for this excellent question. It touches upon all of us and most of the fields in life. The education policy makers work also intensely with school management, the principals, and when we monitor their educational concepts, this is maybe the easiest way to explain how. Professionals have suggested the dispersed management system, meaning a transition from an autocrat and know-it-all to strengthening competencies, team building, moving ahead together. I'm sure that the education policy is on this route, and that these results will be a consequence of first understanding the concept of collaborative learning, in addition to everything else that we call critical thinking and networking, and last but not least, lifelong learning. And the development strategy of Slovenia contributes to that significantly. This is one of the objectives. This means that it is impossible to expect in regular education period that an individual will understand everything necessary. We are transitioning to the concept of being permanently in the education system, and that we respond critically. This is why the sustainable development concept should be understood broadly, that we are also talking about global learning, where we need an active citizen who understands what it means to live in a democratic society, and that the things, once they are put on the agenda, cannot be simply ignored as unimportant, because in the past the system allowed it. Now, if something is put on the agenda, it should be understood as a challenge, especially if analytical data lies behind. And when we talk about climate change, this is the case. And we are certain that the dialogue ahead of us will result in a different decision-making culture, accepting the transition to solutions, because they will not be easy. The folk wisdom says that it is easier to move a cemetery than change the curriculum, and you wouldn't believe that it still holds. There are societies proving the breakthrough, that a breakthrough is possible by means of a dialogue, and they are a kind of beacons elsewhere, not in Slovenia. And I believe that all of us, through this discussion, this roundtable, we can contribute to that. This means looking at such challenges and environmental issues from other perspectives. I would like to mention here, in particular, active citizens who should take a critical approach to serious challenges, and it is here where we see the answers. And I also mentioned that knowledge is there, it should only be connected. I expect that such approaches will very soon result in major breakthroughs. Thank you very much, Ms. Bucik. Maybe the fact that they are rooted in our legacy, where the generations of our grandfathers and grandmothers had to adapt both to changes in the nature and the changes in the society. Maybe our legacy may provide a strong support to us on the way described by Mr. Ojsteršek. Yes, that's true. This is what we have emphasized for some time now, and maybe before, when the colleague mentioned food waste, and this year in particular, when Slovenia is the European region of gastronomy and the emphasis is on food, on healthy food, we know that in the past, no food produced at home was thrown away. Farmers knew how to use everything. Today, a lot of food is discarded. An apple should look beautiful when you eat it, etc. And everything that is bad goes to waste bins. It was different in the past, and we wish to raise awareness among children and adults through our legacy. As regards education, it seems very important to me that these things start early in the childhood, that it is truly lifelong learning, as you said, where the generations are interconnected. And if we succeed and achieve the intergeneration transition, these things are even stronger. The practice shows that often children change the mindsets of parents or grandparents, or encourage them to change. This is also important. Contemporary art also responds to all this, and seeking common roots here is very important. Also, in the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development and in the documents subsequently adopted, the emphasis is on the importance of working together. It seems to me that we look at the development only in our our field and don't see the other part. We live our lives comprehensively. We don't live it by areas. I'm not dealing now with water and the next minute with something in education. Rather, I try to connect these things, and in this way we wish and try to connect also culture and include it in various topics. I know that the circle here today is limited, but as regards this topic, when we work, we cooperate closely with the colleagues from the Ministry of Health and the National Public Health Institute, with the colleagues from Agriculture and Food. To put it simply, we try to deal with things as comprehensively as possible. Thank you very much, Mr. Berdavs. I think that's the government in its development policies already have some tools for a quick response to changing circumstances and new challenges. Part of public funding in different activities go through public tenders whose programming documents are mostly not very limiting. They define the areas of funding, but not what exactly needs to be done. Project ideas, of course, come from the ground, and such a method of funding and managing the implementation of development policies allows that different projects are applied for to try to address the new challenges. In this way, policy makers can attract new ideas and initiatives according to the bottom-up principle. Therefore, I wouldn't say I worry that we would remain in the past, deal with problems that no longer exist. I think that we have the necessary mechanisms. This does not mean, of course, that it wouldn't be useful to reinforce their implementation. Thank you very much.
Adult training actually deals with different things. We actually can take part in different projects from different ministries. So I can say that we are dispersed through different areas. Definitely, it makes sense what we also try to introduce in our municipality, in our region as well, with other municipality in Primorska region. We try to introduce a green-colored program that would raise awareness of people and also practically guide them into being green. We have to start by knowing the fact that people don't change overnight. Their green thinking will not happen overnight. So here we have to proceed gradually. Now we have 2 communities, next year 4, and then at the end I hope all 10 will be included. In our municipality we offer a lot. It depends on the program that we offer. We don't have multi-annual financing from our founder, but we've designed the program in the way that it can be upgraded and we can apply to different tenders. Why adult education is priority? We have to keep this in mind. There are not 50 of us. There is 10 and 12 or 20 of us. And this is the challenge. How we can find our place in different resolutions or programs. Now we have an ideal opportunity when we are preparing the operational program for current financial perspective to additionally recognize people's universities, to see us as a modern educational center.
Let's move to the next question, to the last round of our discussion. What is the role of adult training in responding to climate change, new forms of management? I'm grateful, Mr. Ojsteršek, that you mentioned the importance of lifelong learning. For decades, it has been clear to us that conflicts are a normal part of building up a community and responding to changes, even though they bother us all. How can adult training contribute to a faster response, to be more flexible in view of all of these ever faster and ever more extreme changes? For example, if we think of the damage on enormous surfaces in Notranska, and it is impossible to protect ourselves from such a phenomenon directly through training. We respond very quickly to an extreme situation, but we are slow responding to soft changes. And perhaps adult training, which is already dispersed, which is used to intergenerational learning, is entering the digital transformation already, and now also green transformation, and it has the initiatives mentioned by Mr. Berdavs. How do you see adult learning in the coming years and its role? Adult training policy is facing many challenges. The key challenge is the adult participation rate, and here it seems to me that we as a society lack a breakthrough. The lifelong learning concept isn't something truly broadly present in the society. This gap between those taking part in adult training and those lagging behind somewhat is the key challenge to ensure, to be addressed in order to ensure that the change takes place as quickly as possible by seeking appropriate answers. What is the key element to contribute that the lifelong learning concept becomes omnipresent, which is not the case now, as the rate is really low, and then through that achieve key change. And as both colleagues said, the fact is that the society will change when we will live differently. And to be able to live differently, the concepts will have to be internalized. We don't only say that we need to know something about it, but also that we live differently. Some will be forced to use other fuels, other approaches to mobility, but somewhere this will be delayed at the level of society, and as individuals we will either participate through less food waste or think how to solve it in another way, or we will not. Lifelong learning constitutes a key challenge to the field of education. The relevant documents open it up, but we don't know whether it will be enough to increase the investments or do something else. And when I read the documents, what is evident is inefficiency, that we as the society do not manage to address the measures to reach a breakthrough. Everything else, as regards the importance of education, does not need to be highlighted here. Education is certainly a crucial element of every society in the transfer of knowledge, change, development of people, if we talk about it as the basic part of education so much. Thank you very much. Another sub-question for all of you. There are probably many young people with us online, and they are the ones who will be affected when we retire by the consequences of our decisions and mistakes, and those from the past as well. And in 2019, the Youth for Climate Justice made a request or an initiative about what to include in terms of content in adult training. Maybe you can say something about that. The response by politicians to the challenge that there is no planet B will be crucial. Either we will constitute the change, because otherwise we will lose credibility of being teachers to young generations until they're grown up. So I think the response by all of us is this message, whether we are the change here and now, and how we will read and respond, or else we will lose the integrity and also the concept will fall of education as we know it, namely first as an element of knowledge transfer for the needs of some operations that the state needed in the early period until today. Thank you. Yes. What I find interesting is that the young respond and that they are critical, are motivated for what is different, even though it is usually extracurricular. I attended today a panel discussion on motivation at the Educational Development Unit, and it is interesting how low the motivation for learning is for school subjects, while at the same time we see that the young are more engaged in some other fields, and it is important that we build on that, that we bring specific content closer to them, that they can be critical and that they can bring our attention to the fact that they want to be present and take part in decision making. In culture too, we try to increase the engagement of the youth, also children, using mentorship approaches and to teach them such approaches. A short question also for you. Through decades, our original organizational models have got lost. Since we are a relatively young country, maybe the Ministry of Culture in this respect could show to the youth, for example, that in 6,000 settlements in Slovenia, which are dispersed, small, this community action is alive. But of course it is not part of the education system. Maybe here a synergy between education and culture is possible. We are really doing our best to penetrate through the formal and informal education system also to local communities. In many local communities, cultural institutions, professional or amateur, are very active and very integrating. There are many cultural societies, also within youth centers, where the field of culture is also present and where they respond to these things. The ministry can provide guidance, and this is what we are trying to do also in the new national program for culture. These topics are paid additional attention, but We can only succeed if we work together. It is impossible for culture on its own, the Ministry of the Environment and Spatial Planning on its own, but also a truly common approach is necessary. This seems crucial to me. From the national level to the local, this means a bottom-up and a top-down approach together, and for the young people together with them. Yes, young people are our future, and it seems in this context that one of the challenges is to increase the share of those, not only among the young, but also among adults who are engaged, who are prepared for change. The transition to a more sustainable society will require, as mentioned earlier, the cooperation of all of us, the citizens. Different experience in different societies due to this corona crisis that has not been brought to an end shows a different level of cohesion, readiness for action. Some individuals are more or less willing to act, and others who defend the daily routine. And here, I think, we have some challenges, more or less directly relating to the challenges mentioned earlier by Mr. Ojsteršek. The more there are motivated people among us for active participation in change in the society, the higher the interest in education, not only compulsory education, to some extent, such as secondary higher, but also adult training, requiring some sacrifice. So we need to sacrifice some time and effort, and we need motivation for that. The last 2 years have shown that we are facing specific challenges in Slovenia. A suggestion or sub-question also to you, Mr. Berdavs, and then we'll wrap up our discussion. In adult training, we are used to pay special attention and care to vulnerable groups, less included, perhaps less educated, socially and economically weaker, while in the environment, though, there are more and more vulnerable, injured ecosystems. How can the Ministry of the Environment extend a hand to the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of Education, in converging the care for vulnerable ecosystems, for example, wetlands protected by the Ramsar Convention for adults, to take care through training of such vulnerable landscapes? The view of us dealing in environmental protection is a bit specific in that the most environmental damage, to put it roughly, is caused by the least vulnerable social groups. More vulnerable social groups are those that suffer the consequences the most. Our duty certainly is to deal with more vulnerable social groups, and as far as the nature is concerned, the ecosystems, climate, as victims of our action, our role definitely is to transmit the right information, what it is that can really help the environment, what kind of knowledge we need, what skills, what we need to do differently, because it is not all the same. In view of the complexity of the task, it is important to focus on the fields with a higher effect, and of course, according to our abilities, we can contribute something also through financial means, and this is also what we are doing through the inclusion in the programs of the European funding and the financing from the Climate Fund. Here we are already active. Thank you all for a socially responsible discussion. And now all online participants are invited to raise questions, make initiatives, and to show an active response to climate change.
Lahko bi rekla, da je izobraževanje odraslih bolj podpornik, bom rekla, vsem tem razvoju po trajnostnih načelih in kot prispodobo bi lahko izpostavljala posoški razvojni center. Navsezadnje z našim povezovanjem in sodelovanjem, bom rekla, sodelavcev iz različnih organizacijskih enot, tako ljudske univerze kot okolja in podeželja,
space, rural area, we combine the puzzle, and without interconnection and true cooperation, this story definitely could not bear so many rich fruits. We would expect from decision maker a more comprehensive and systemic approach, true connection, cooperation between different actors and levels.
Pričakovala bi, da bi bili kot eno intelektualno rezilo,
an intellectual razor blend with common intellectual challenges, with planned resources to avoid such a big gap. Practitioners are here, willing, with their enthusiasm, ready to step into the action, move. And we are looking for opportunities, possibilities with our interconnectivity in the field, in local environments, so that we can bring this so-called, or overcome these so-called financial gaps, if we wish to make this green story a breakthrough. And it cannot stand on individual projects only. Sincere thank you to all the participants. I loved our piece on Friday when we made the recording, and later on when we got the recordings from the field as well. Pay attention, these are all the teasers, samples, short experts from longer pieces that will be introduced in our annual conference on adult education with sustainable topic as well, presented in our virtual stand that we already know from last year conference. You will soon get the invitations. And now in the last comment we had a chat, lively chat happening. Nataša, Nevenka shared some resources, some more politically designed resources, strategies are also available on our webpage, and we will also add these cultural resources and the signs of sustainability that Nevenka mentioned. Then what we heard, Tanya, thank you. A lot was expressed words, but we need specific action. Yes, we are getting there. And I hope that this event will develop further. At this moment, I would invite previously mentioned colleague Tadeja Kvasmajer from the Ministry of Agriculture, briefly, but still, the floor is yours. Thank you for inviting me, and greetings on my part. I have to say that it was very interesting for me to listen to the round table. I wrote some thoughts down. I will not answer to all the questions that were asked of them, but just briefly, my opinion is that we are learning from our birth till the death, consciously or unconsciously. And the adult education that is organized is that more quality, but if we walk around with our open eyes and minds, we learn subconsciously, unconsciously. You see good situations in the environment that you move through. What I want to say is that what our ancestors and what we
do now to be able to talk more about sustainability means that we caused the damage in the environment, and unfortunately the society starts to change and move back to nature, to what we started to destroy, what our ancestors started to destroy. Oftentimes it's way too late. So it's crucial to learn. Now we have the opportunity, when we see what problems we have caused, to teach our children not to cause more damage. And it was said quite nicely, young people are quite active, and there are our critical mirrors, if I may use this term, and we know when we are happy to see our image in the mirror. It is important to listen to the young people. We see the bad image that we want to avoid in the mirror. They warn us about the damage caused, what we have done, that we have to shift directions and to change ourselves. That's the hardest thing. At the moment, I work on the strategy to reduce food waste. It was mentioned today, and the strategy is ready. It will be open to interministerial consultations, and I'm happy that I've joined you in the moment. I found the fact that I failed to address the adult education. We've mentioned young people's education, but not adult education. So I'm happy to take a note that we have to include that as well in our strategy. Our society works in compartmentalized. Each ministry needs their own strategy, but we've heard that we need to work together. Strategies that are crucial, critical, burning strategies should be included in existent strategy, and the ministries should be not egoistic but open, using the rough language by saying egoistical, but we should consider the impulses from other ministries and try to introduce those messages in our existing strategies and change society, our habits, and so on. Interconnectivity, listening to each other, looking at each other, learning from each other, that is the key, and following the examples of good practice. Excellent, thank you. You've added the last piece to what we've heard. We've born an alliance of 4 ministries. We usually include up to 9 or 14 ministries to our discussions. And yes, rough, but through what you've said, we have to know each other and see where we can meet to reach the synergies for better results. Now, we are exact at the time of our break. So, are there any of the panelists or listeners online? Do you want to add something? I don't see everyone. If you might help me. Are there any raised hands? No. So we all need a 15 minutes break. Let me thank you all for your participation, for everything that has happened. And let's move into the second part. We've moved into the green. That was the title of our section. In the second section, we will discuss the Plan B up to the end, to our valuable guest, Boštjan Videmšek, will discuss his book with the same title and something more as well. So see you back at 11:45. Thank you all. See you soon in 15 minutes.